Good morning, everyone. My name is Lisa
안녕하세요.
Millman,
제 이름은 리사 밀먼입니다.
and I am a specialist at the Family Resource Center. And what I'd like to do is welcome you to our using the data collection tool to inform least restrictive environment, LRE decision making. I'd like to introduce Jennifer Smetic. Jennifer, welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this presentation through the Family Resource Center about using the data collection tool to inform least restrictive decision making. I'm Jennifer Smetic, a program manager in the Office of Special Education Procedural Support. And my colleague, Mary McGreevy, who is also a program manager, is here. And we are also joined by other colleagues from the Department of Special Services. So in our presentation this morning, I'm going to begin with an overview of least restrictive environment under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA. I will share data that the school division reports through the Virginia Department of Education on indicators 5 and 6, which are the indicators that represent LEA. Next, I'm going to introduce the LRE data collection tool, and we will examine those essential LRE factors and key questions related to LRE, as well as take a look at examples of data sources that can be used to develop responses. Along the way, I'm going to highlight components of each section and cover some frequently asked questions. Then we will discuss the family or the parent role in the consideration and determination of LRE through the IEP process. Your voice matters, and we offer some ideas for before, during, and after your child's IEP meeting. Finally, at the end, we will allow some time for questions. So please, if you do have questions that aren't answered through this presentation, please feel free to add those into that question and answer function. So on this slide, I am providing an overview of that IDEA. So LRE, or the least restrictive environment, is a guiding principle in the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And LRE does play a critical role in determining not only where a student will spend their time in school, but also how special education services will be provided. Specifically, the LRE requirement within IDEA necessitates that students with disabilities receive their education alongside their peers without disabilities to the maximum extent appropriate. Students should not be removed from the general education classroom unless learning cannot be achieved, even with the use of supplementary aids and services. So LRE is determined on a case-by-case basis during the development of a student's individualized education program, or IEP. During this process, the IEP team, which is a multidisciplinary group of professionals, and the student's parents would discuss what that individualized program of instruction and related services are for that student. These services and supports should enable the student to make progress toward meeting individually identified academic or functional annual goals, and so ensure that they're involved and make progress in the general education curriculum, as well as to participate in extracurricular activities and other non-academic activities, and take part in these activities with other students, both with and without disabilities. So now we will look at the why behind least restrictive environment, or LRE, as the acronym is. This is what IDEA says about least restrictive environment. To the maximum extent appropriate, children with disabilities, including children in public or private institutions or other care facilities, are educated with children who are not disabled. In special classes, separate schooling, and other removal of children with disabilities from the regular educational environment occurs only when the nature or severity of the disability of a child is such that education in regular classes with the use of supplementary aids and services cannot be achieved satisfactorily. So the word environment and least restrictive environment can be interpreted to imply that LRE is a place or a location. In fact, LRE does not merely refer to a particular setting. Rather, identifying the LRE involves making program decisions about what services and supports a student needs to be successful and where and how those services and supports can be provided effectively. The IEP team must justify decisions to remove a student from the general education environment. IDEA requires school districts to place students in the least restrictive environment. And it is the IEP team who determines the LRE for each student based on the student's unique needs. The two important things to note about least restrictive environment. So considering and determining LRE as part of the IEP ensures that students with disabilities are educated with non-disabled peers as often and to the greatest extent as possible. And determining LRE is a vital step in the development of the Individualized Education Program, or IEP. So special education indicators. So school divisions are required to submit information and data for reporting, monitoring, and compliance purposes for each indicator. And so next, we're going to take a look at what state indicators reflect LRE. So LRE, least restrictive environment, is represented by indicators 5 and 6. Indicator 5 refers to school age least restrictive environment. And so reading through these indicators, 5A are students included in regular education, regular classroom 80% or more of the day. 5B are students included in regular classroom less than 40% of the day. And 5C, students served in separate public or private day, residential, home-based, or hospital facility. In Virginia, this data is collected through the December 1 child count. Indicator 6 refers to preschool least restrictive environment. 6A are children aged 3 through 5 with IEPs attending a regular early childhood program and receiving the majority of special education and related services in the regular education childhood program. 6B are children aged 3 through 5 with IEPs attending a separate special education class, separate school, or residential facility. And 6C are children ages 3 through 5 with IEPs receiving services in the home environment. So FCPS has participated in several comprehensive reviews to examine the current state of special education implementation in our school division. One review was sponsored by the school board and completed by the American Institutes for Research, known as AIR. And the finding from that AIR review was that FCPS, Fairfax County Public Schools, does not meet Virginia state targets for the percentage of time SWDs, or students with disabilities, are included in the general education setting. So this table represents indicator 5A, the percent of FCPS students with IEPs age 6 through 21 in general education classrooms, 80% or more per day. So this table shows that in 2021-22, 48.61% of FCPS students with IEPs ages 6 through 21 were in general education classrooms 80% or more of the day, which did not meet the Virginia state target of at least 70% of students receiving services in general education classrooms for 80% more of the day. In addition, the percentage of students with disabilities served in general education classrooms 80% or more of the day in FCPS is lower than the Virginia targeted percentage, which ranged from approximately 69% to 72%. These patterns were consistent within FCPS when analyzing trends and data from previous school years. This table represents indicator 5B, which is the percent of FCPS students with IEPs ages 6 through 21 in general education classrooms less than 40% per day. So in the 2021-22 school year, indicator 5B shows that only 22.05% of FCPS students with IEPs ages 6 through 21 were in general education classrooms less than 40% of the day, which did not meet the Virginia state target of fewer than 8% of students receiving services in general education classrooms less than 40% of the day. FCPS also did not meet the Virginia state targets in 2016, 2017, 2018, and 2019. Historical and recent data shows that FCPS continues to propose placement for students in the special education setting at a higher percentage rate than the state established target. So next, we're going to take a look at the what of LRE. The least restrictive environment begins with the presumption that the student will access general education for the entire school day. So the general education classroom must be the first consideration for every student. Regardless of the student's perceived academic or behavioral functioning, school teams must start a discussion of least restrictive environment by fully considering all possible ways a student can participate in the general education curriculum. Least restrictive environment takes into account the continuum of services available within a school. Special education services are provided within a continuum in each school building. Least restrictive environment is dependent on individual student needs, which may vary across activities and content throughout the school day. It is the needs of the student that inform the LRE throughout the school day. Least restrictive environment also varies for students even within the same curriculum, such as the general curriculum and adapted curriculum. Curriculum or special programming alone does not determine LRE. A student's LRE is an individualized decision based on the needs of the student. Least restrictive environment guides the determination of services and placement. LRE in the IEP process is considered and determined first before services and placement. So LRE, least restrictive environment, is not solely determined by area of eligibility, type or severity of disability, special education service delivery model, availability of staff, availability of space, or master schedule. Next, we're going to take a look at what does access to general education look like. Access to general education could look like engaging with instruction and all general education opportunities with or without supplementary aids and services. It can also look like opportunity to interact and participate in activities with typically developing peers. What does removal from general education look like? And here are some examples. Removal from general education could look like instruction in a small group, special education only setting. Could look like special education electives, for example, personal development, WAT, work awareness training, life skills. Could look like PE or health in a small group special education setting, such as adapted PE. Could look like adapted specials, art, music, STEAM, delivered apart from general education peers. Removal from general education could also look like an intervention block with a special education teacher and special education students. Could also look like lunch or recess apart from general education peers. So in this section, this next session, we're going to focus on the how of LRE and how the data collection tool specifically will support the consideration and determination of LRE for special education students. So some people may ask why. Why are we adding the LRE data collection tool into our process? And here is why. Special education regulations require schools to document all alternatives considered and the rationale for choosing the selected LRE. Many IEPs lack objective data-informed rationales for why students are educated outside of the general education setting. The LRE data collection tool supports IEP teams in making individualized, data-driven decisions when considering the removal of a student from the general education environment. So in short, the LRE data collection tool is a graphic organizer for the data to support the conversations we've already been having. I'm going to take us to the form that exists in what we call C-STARS. And the form for LRE has not changed. The questions or the essential factors are the same. The IEP team must consider all these essential LRE factors to determine a student's potential access to general education. The LRE data collection tool is designed to help organize that data in support of decisions and in support of discussions and decision making. So the data collection tool, which is Form 371 and is public facing on the website, the FCPS website under the Forms cabinet, is it's listed under the other special education forms. It is divided into two sections, and we're going to take a closer look at each section. And I will highlight as we go a couple of things that I want you to note as we go through that. The data collection tool is organized to allow the teams to have these individualized discussion about each area of need in which the student might access the least restrictive environment, or in which they might require more restrictive support. The LRE determination should consider the student's individual needs and how it impacts access to different activities and content areas during the school day. So this LRE data collection tool, section 1 is drafted and shared with families by the special education case manager prior to an IEP meeting. Section 2 is considered and determined collaboratively by the IEP team in the IEP meeting. And we're going to take a closer look at each section. So page 1, which is includes section 1, and I've taken a screenshot of it here, includes the directions for completing the form. It allows the case manager to note student areas of need. And it also has space for the case manager to indicate any of the knowledgeable staff who participated in the collaboration of the draft of the data collection tool. Page 2 includes the remainder of section 1 and section 2. And so for section 1, we will be looking at those essential LRE factors. We'll take a look at key questions. And then the column 3 is what is drafted, or the response that would be drafted by the case manager and shared with the parent in advance of an IEP meeting. So just a couple of key things to note about section 1. It's drafted prior to the IEP meeting. It considers input from knowledgeable staff who are listed. It considers LRE factors number 1 through 4, which we will go through in a later slide, and key questions. And responses are supported by data sources. And I've put an asterisk here because we will take a look at potential data sources in a later slide as well. So digging into section 1, what I've done is from that data collection tools, I've pulled out the essential LRE factors, numbers 1 through 4, along with the key questions, so we could take a closer look at them in this presentation. So the first essential LRE factor is removal of children with disabilities from the regular educational environment occurs only if the nature or severity of the disability is such that education in regular classes with the use of supplementary aids and services cannot be achieved satisfactorily. So the special education case manager is responsible for drafting responses to section 1 on this data collection tool. And the key questions to consider are, what is the nature and severity of the student's disability? And what supplementary aids and services, for example, accommodations, are needed for the student to achieve a free, appropriate public education? So essential LRE factor 2 is a child with a disability is not removed from education and age-appropriate regular classroom solely because of needed modifications in the general education. So the key questions to consider here are, what, if any, modifications to the general education may be required? Now there's a note here and there's a link in our form and that will bring up a modifications and an accommodations resource. And I think what's important to note is that accommodations change how a student will learn or demonstrate their knowledge in keeping the expectations the same. It does not change, accommodations do not change what is taught, and it does not change those expectations. A modification changes what the student is expected to learn. It has objectives different from those of the rest of the class, and it often changes, lowers, or reduces learning expectations. So just making that distinction there, there is a resource that's built into the data collection tool for schools and families to access. Essential LRE factor number 3. In selecting the least restrictive environment, consideration is given to any potential harmful effect on the child or on the quality of services which the child needs. The key questions for this essential factor is, what, if any, are the potentially harmful effects on the student for each placement option considered? What, if any, are the potentially harmful effects on the quality of services the student needs and each of the placement options considered? So parents may express concern about the term harmful, but the focus of this section is that the impact that the team must consider what that impact would be for a potential change in environment and what it could have on the student's educational and social opportunities, and what opportunities may be decreased or lost in a least restrictive environment or a more restrictive environment. So when you think of harmful effects, you could consider, or teams could consider, diminished access to the full range of the curriculum, including potential electives, or it could consider lack of opportunity for social interaction and decreased opportunity to build relationships with peers. A team might consider the impact to a child and a child's self-esteem, maybe a lack of opportunities for appropriate role models, increased exposure to peers with more significant needs. And so there are a lot of different factors that could be considered when you see that word harmful. So essential LRE factor, and this is the last LRE factor that's included as part of section 1, is that the local educational agency shall ensure that each child with a disability has the supplementary aids and services determined by the child's IEP team to be appropriate and necessary for the child to participate in non-academic settings. So the key question is, what supplementary aids and services might the student need to participate in non-academic settings? For example, meals, recess, extracurricular activities. So the student's needs outside of the classroom are considered, specifically for school-sponsored and extracurricular activities. So next, we're going to take a look at section 2. And remember, section 2 is completed during the IEP meeting with the IEP team. It is the additional page 2 can be copied for multiple areas of need, recognizing that some students with disabilities have more than one area of need. This form can be duplicated to tailor it to what those students' areas of need. In section 2, we consider essential LRE factor number 5 and key questions. And then we have that determination and justification, which is supported by data sources. So section 2 has LRE, essential LRE factor number 5. And this, again, is what is completed during the IEP meeting. The local educational agency shall document all alternatives considered and the rationale for choosing the selected placement, and an explanation of the extent, if any, to which the child will not participate with children without disabilities in the regular class and in the activities described in this section. So the key questions are: what alternatives have been considered? What placement setting has been selected? And what is the justification for the proposed placement? So this section 2, this essential LRE factor and the 3 key questions are the only part of the LRE data collection tool that is completed in the IEP meeting. And the IEP team would respond to these 3 questions by area of need for the student. So as I've mentioned several times in both sections 1 and 2, responses to the essential LRE factors and key questions are drafted using available data. On this slide, examples of data sources are listed. This list is not exhaustive, and additional sources of data may be used. So I'm going to give you all a moment to look at this slide and look at some of these data sources. So next, we're going to take a look at the role of the parent. I want to thank everyone for joining us this morning. We want to ensure that parents, guardians, and students students at the age of 18 or older know their role in the IEP process for the consideration and determination of least restrictive environment and how the LRE data collection tool informs the process and support conversations. So your voice does matter. And what we want to do on the next slide is share some suggestions for guardians and parents. Give me.
Okay.
Thank you. We have a busy office this morning, so I think folks around me did not realize I was presenting. I apologize.
So thank you. This was a wonderful presentation. And now
I'm not quite done
She's
yet.
not done.
okay. Go ahead.
Sorry. So in this next chat, I apologize. Like I said, it's busy office and it's starting to get busy around my cubicle. So in this chart, what we've done is provided some guidance for parents and guardians and students over the age of 18 about the role in considering and determining LRE through the IEP process. So given some guidance to consider before an IEP meeting, during an IEP meeting, and after the IEP meeting. So before an IEP team, the role of the parent could be to review the drafted portions of the IEP and LRE data collection tool received at least 2 business days prior to the IEP meeting. Also, parents could complete the parent input form with additional information for the IEP team to consider in the meeting. During an IEP meeting, families or parents could provide input and ask questions about the pre-drafted Section 1. Reference data and adjust Section 1 if needed. Also, parents can participate in that collaborative discussion when considering Section 2 about alternatives considered and selected, including the justification for the decision. After the IEP meeting, as a parent, you could make sure that you ensure a copy of the completed LRE data collection tools included with the IEP proposal for your review, and review the IEP proposal and PWN before providing informed consent. So next, what we've done is I've collected some of the frequently asked questions. And what I'd like to do is go through some of those questions. Perhaps it may answer some of the questions folks have submitted through the Q&A function. But if not, we will have some time at the end to answer some additional questions. So the first frequently asked question is, when is completion of the LRE data collection tool required? And this will be required at each annual IEP or whenever a change to LRE is being considered. The next question is, when are school teams required to begin using the LRE data collection tool? And schools are required to begin using this form at the beginning of the 3rd quarter or approximately beginning of February. This form has been piloted in some schools. Some teams are using it already. The school teams can use it if they would like, but it is not required until the beginning of the 3rd quarter. Who is responsible for completing Section 1? So a student's case manager is responsible for collaborating with knowledgeable staff in advance of the IEP meeting. Names and roles of consulted staff members will be listed in Section 1 on page 1. Is Section 1 drafted and shared with parents prior to the IEP meeting? Yes. At least 2 business days in advance of an IEP meeting. And can section 1 be revised by the IEP team during the meeting with parents? Yes. Section 1 can be revised as part of a collaborative IEP team discussion using available data. Additional FAQs, or frequently asked questions, are: when is Section 2 completed? Section 2 is completed through IEP team collaboration in the meeting. Does this form or the data collection tool need to be completed if a student has already been accessing special education classes through the general or adapted curriculum? The answer is yes, at the annual IEP. If a student is currently accessing special education classes, they have been removed from the general education setting. Therefore, this form is required. Is the form completed by area of need or by activity and content area? So LRE determination should first consider a student's individual areas of need and how it impacts access to different activities and content during the school day. And does the form need to be completed when considering a student's participation in specials, electives, and/or health and PE? What about recess or lunch? So yes, any time of removal from the general education environment is being considered, this form will be required. So at this time, I have completed my presentation for the group, and we will stop recording. I want to thank the Family Resource Center for hosting us today, and